The glittering facade. The Seattle skyline glittered against the evening sky as the city's elite gathered at the Four Seasons Hotel. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across the grand ballroom, where men in perfectly tailored tuxedos and women draped in designer gowns sipped champagne and discussed their latest charitable endeavors. This was the annual Children's Music Education Foundation Benefit Gala, an evening where Seattle's wealthiest would write generous checks to support young musicians while congratulating themselves on their philanthropy. Among the crowd moved Marcus Whitfield, a tech CEO whose silver hair and expensive suit couldn't quite mask the coldness in his eyes. At 52, Marcus had built an empire through ruthless business practices, but tonight he wore the mask of benevolent charity. He moved from table to table, his practiced smile never wavering as he spoke about the foundation's noble mission. Music education transforms young lives, he told a group of donors, his voice smooth as silk. It gives them purpose, direction, hope. But Marcus's attention wasn't on his guests or their contributions. His gaze kept drifting to a woman in a simple black server's uniform who moved quietly through the crowd, refilling champagne glasses with graceful, almost musical movements. Elena Martinez was 48 years old. Though the years had been kind to her face, there was something in the way she carried herself, a dignity that her humble uniform couldn't diminish. As she worked, her fingers would occasionally move as if playing an invisible instrument, a habit she'd never been able to break. What the guests didn't know, what Marcus had only recently discovered, was that Elena harbored a secret. Hidden in the small staff room where she took her breaks was a saxophone case, worn with age but lovingly maintained. And just hours earlier, Marcus had walked past that room and heard something that would change the course of this elegant evening forever. The discovery. It had been during the afternoon setup when Marcus, making his rounds to ensure everything was perfect, heard the sound drifting from the staff quarters. At first, he'd thought it was a radio playing classical music, but as he paused to listen, he realized it was live. Someone was playing saxophone with a skill that made him stop in his tracks. Following the sound, Marcus had discovered Elena in her small break room, her eyes closed, completely lost in her music. She played a hauntingly beautiful melody that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than mere technique. For a moment, even Marcus, a man who viewed everything through the lens of power and control, felt something stir within him. But that moment of appreciation quickly twisted into something darker. Here was this woman, this maid, possessing a talent that belonged on concert stages, yet she was serving drinks to his guests. The irony wasn't lost on him, and neither was the opportunity it presented. Marcus Whitfield was a man who collected power over others the way some people collected art, and he had just discovered the perfect way to assert his dominance while entertaining his guests with what he imagined would be an amusing spectacle. The band hired for the evening, a respected jazz quartet led by James Robinson, a distinguished musician who had performed at venues across the country, was in crisis. Their saxophone player had called in sick at the last minute, leaving them unable to perform Summertime, the evening's centerpiece tribute to the foundation. Most people would see this as a disappointing setback. Marcus saw it as destiny. The trap is set. Elena, Marcus called out as she arranged flowers near the stage, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. She turned, immediately straightening. Yes, Mr. Whitfield. Is there something wrong with the service? Not at all. His smile was sharp as a blade. In fact, I have a special request. The band needs a saxophone player for tonight's performance. Elena looked confused, her brow furrowing slightly. I'm sorry, sir, but I don't understand. Should I contact the hotel's entertainment department? Marcus savored this moment, the moment before he revealed his hand. No need. I happened to walk by the staff quarters earlier and heard someone playing saxophone beautifully. That was you, wasn't it? The color drained from Elena's face. Her secret practice, her private solace, had been discovered. That was just for personal enjoyment, sir. I wouldn't want to disturb anyone. Disturb? Marcus chuckled, but there was no warmth in the sound. Oh no, quite the opposite. Your playing was adequate. The band needs someone tonight, and you're here. Elena's hands began to tremble slightly, though she tried to hide it. Mr. Whitfield, I appreciate the suggestion, but I'm working. I'm not a performer. I'm part of the catering staff. Marcus's voice hardened, the velvet glove slipping to reveal the iron fist beneath. Elena, This is a very important evening for me and my foundation. When I make a request, I expect cooperation. Surely you understand the importance of team effort? The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Elena had worked enough service jobs to recognize the tone, comply, or face the consequences. Sir, I don't have my instrument with me and I'm not prepared for— The band has a saxophone, problem solved. Be on stage in 10 minutes. He turned to leave, then paused, delivering his final blow with casual cruelty. Oh, and Elena, don't disappoint me. I'd hate for this evening to reflect poorly on anyone's employment status. The weight of the past alone in the service corridor, Elena sank onto a metal folding chair, her breathing shallow and rapid. The walls seemed to close in around her as the weight of Marcus's request settled on her shoulders. Maria Santos, an older woman from housekeeping who had become Elena's closest friend at the hotel, found her there. Maria had worked service jobs her entire life and could read the signs of trouble in any language. Mija, what happened? You look like you've seen a ghost. He wants me to perform, Elena whispered, the words barely audible, in front of everyone. As Elena explained Marcus's ultimatum, Maria's expression grew grave. She knew Elena's story, knew about the dreams that had been shattered 8 years ago. Elena Martinez hadn't always been a hotel worker. For 12 years, she had been the principal woodwind player for the Seattle Symphony, one of the most respected orchestras on the West Coast. Her talent had been recognized early, and she'd worked tirelessly to perfect her craft, eventually earning a coveted position among Seattle's finest musicians. But life has a way of changing everything in an instant. 8 years ago, a car accident had damaged the nerves in her left hand, ending her classical career. The settlement from the accident had barely covered her medical bills, and with no other skills that paid a living wage, Elena had found herself moving from one service job to another, her music relegated to secret practice sessions in tiny rooms. Maria, Elena said, her voice breaking, I haven't performed in public in 8 years. Not since the accident. What if I can't do it anymore? What if I've lost it? Maria took her friend's trembling hands in her own weathered ones. Elena, you're one of the most talented musicians I've ever known. Music doesn't leave you, it just waits for the right moment to come back. But he doesn't want to give me a moment, Elena replied, tears threatening to spill. He wants to humiliate me. I could see it in his eyes. To him, I'm just the help who needs to be reminded of her place. Maria was quiet for a long moment, then spoke with the wisdom that comes from a lifetime of watching people reveal their true character under pressure. Then you have a choice, Mija. You can let him humiliate you, or you can remind everyone in that room who Elena Martinez really is. The stage is set back in the ballroom. The atmosphere had grown restless. The scheduled performance was delayed, and Seattle's elite were not accustomed to waiting. Marcus seized the opportunity to build anticipation for his cruel entertainment. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, taking the microphone with theatrical flair, tonight we celebrate the power of music to transform lives. In that spirit, I'd like to introduce someone special who will be performing with our talented musicians. He paused, savoring the moment like a predator about to pounce. Please welcome Elena Martinez, who, when she's not ensuring our evening runs smoothly, apparently has hidden musical talents. The applause that followed was polite but confused. Many guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure what to make of this unusual situation. Was this some kind of novelty act? A demonstration of the Foundation's commitment to discovering talent in unexpected places? Margaret Sinclair, a prominent philanthropist in her late 60s who had spent decades supporting the arts in Seattle, leaned forward with interest. There was something familiar about the name Elena Martinez, though she couldn't quite place it. James Robinson, the band leader, felt a knot forming in his stomach. He'd been forced into this situation by Marcus's demands, and while he was prepared to be supportive, he worried about putting an amateur on stage in front of such a demanding audience. But when Elena emerged from the shadows and walked slowly toward the center of the stage, something remarkable happened. Despite her server's uniform, despite her obvious nervousness, there was an unmistakable dignity in her bearing that commanded attention. The lights caught her face, and Margaret Sinclair suddenly sat bolt upright, recognition dawning. My God, she whispered to her companion. That's Elena Martinez from the symphony. The music begins. Elena stood at center stage, the tenor saxophone heavy in her hands. The weight of it was familiar, comforting, like greeting an old friend after years of separation. She could feel hundreds of eyes upon her, could sense Marcus's satisfaction as he anticipated her humiliation. But as she raised the instrument to her lips, something shifted inside her. The years of practicing in secret, the melodies that had sustained her through the darkest times, the music that had never truly left her soul, it all came flooding back. "This song," she said softly into the microphone, her voice carrying clearly across the silent ballroom, "is for everyone who has ever felt their dreams were impossible." James began the gentle piano introduction to Summertime, the Gershwin classic that had been planned as the evening centerpiece. The bass joined in, then the drums with brushes creating a whisper-soft rhythm that seemed to make the very air vibrate with anticipation. Elena took a breath, and then, the first note that emerged from her saxophone was pure liquid gold. It floated across the ballroom like a prayer, beautiful and haunting and impossibly perfect. This wasn't the tentative sound of someone playing above their skill level. This was a master musician reconnecting with her soul. Marcus's smug expression began to falter as Elena continued, transforming the familiar melody into something transcendent. Each note told a story of loss and hope, of resilience in the face of impossible odds, of dreams deferred but never truly destroyed. Around the ballroom, conversations stopped mid-sentence. Champagne glasses were set down forgotten. This was no longer a curiosity or a novelty act. This was art at its highest level, and everyone in the room could feel it. Elena's eyes were closed now, her body swaying naturally with the rhythm. She poured 8 years of suppressed emotion into every phrase, every breath, every perfectly controlled vibrato. The saxophone sang with a voice that spoke of midnight practices in tiny rooms, of talent forced into hiding, of the unbreakable spirit that keeps music alive even in the darkest circumstances. Recognition and revelation. As Elena built toward the song's emotional climax, Margaret Sinclair found herself with tears streaming down her cheeks. She remembered now Elena Martinez, the prodigiously talented woodwind player who had graced the Seattle Symphony's stage for over a decade before mysteriously disappearing from the music world. Around the ballroom, the transformation was palpable. Wealthy businessmen who normally thought of music as background ambiance found themselves leaning forward, completely captivated. Society women who attended concerts more for social status than artistic appreciation felt something stirring in their souls. James Robinson, accompanying Elena on piano, had played with hundreds of musicians throughout his career, but rarely had he felt such genuine emotional connection. This woman wasn't just playing the notes. She was channeling something deeper, more profound than technique could ever achieve. Elena's interpretation of Summertime became increasingly personal as she played, each phrase shaped by her unique journey from celebrated performer to invisible service worker, and now to this moment of unexpected redemption. The melody soared and dipped, whispered and cried, told stories that words could never capture. As she approached the final phrases, Elena's tone became ethereal, as if she were channeling something beyond the physical realm. The last note hung in the air like a benediction, lingering in the perfect acoustics of the grand ballroom long after her lips had left the mouthpiece. The silence that followed was profound and sacred. For a moment, no one moved, no one breathed, as if afraid to break the spell that Elena's music had cast over the room. Then, slowly, Margaret Sinclair rose from her seat and began to applaud. One by one, every person in the ballroom followed suit. The ovation grew from respectful to thunderous to overwhelming, a sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the elegant hotel. The tables turned. Elena opened her eyes, seemingly surprised to find herself back in the ballroom, rather than in the transcendent space her music had created. Tears streamed down her face as she saw the standing ovation, as she felt the genuine appreciation and respect radiating from the crowd. Marcus remained seated, his face a mixture of shock, anger, and something approaching fear. His plan to humiliate Elena had not only failed, it had backfired spectacularly, revealing his own cruelty while elevating her to heights he had never imagined possible. Margaret Sinclair walked purposefully toward the stage, her evening gown rustling with each determined step. She took the microphone from Marcus without ceremony, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades supporting the arts. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her words ringing clearly across the ballroom, "what we just witnessed was not a novelty act or a demonstration of hidden talent among the staff. Elena Martinez was, and clearly still is, one of Seattle's finest classical musicians. She served as principal woodwind with our beloved Seattle Symphony for over a decade, before her career was interrupted by personal circumstances. Gasps of recognition rippled through the crowd as the pieces fell into place. Several classical music patrons nodded knowingly, remembering Elena's performances from years past. "Elena," Margaret continued, "would you honor us with one more piece?" Elena looked uncertain, her eyes automatically seeking out Marcus, who sat frozen in his chair like a man watching his carefully constructed world crumble around him. I should return to work," Elena said softly, the ingrained deference of years in service jobs temporarily overriding her musical triumph. James Robinson stood from the piano bench, his voice carrying across the ballroom. "Ma'am, with all due respect, your work right now is right here. This is where you belong." The crowd murmured its agreement, and someone from the back of the room called out, "Please." The word was picked up by others, becoming a gentle chant of encouragement. The heart's true song. Elena looked out at the sea of faces, no longer the faces of wealthy strangers who saw her as invisible help, but of people who had just been reminded of music's power to transform, not just lives but hearts and minds. In their eyes, she saw something she hadn't seen directed at her in 8 long years. Genuine respect for her artistry. "There's a piece I wrote 8 years ago," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "After my accident, I never thought I'd play it for anyone." She raised the saxophone once more, and this time there was no nervousness, no hesitation. The melody that emerged was entirely her own creation, a composition born from the ashes of her former life, shaped by pain and loss, but ultimately reaching toward hope and renewal. The music was intensely personal yet universally moving. Elena poured her entire story into the saxophone, the joy of her early success, the devastating accident, the financial struggles, the jobs that barely paid the bills. The saxophone practiced in secret because she couldn't bear to let the music die completely. But most of all, she played the slow, difficult journey from despair back to hope, from brokenness toward healing. As she played, something remarkable happened throughout the ballroom. The conversations from earlier in the evening about charity, about giving, about purpose, took on new meaning. This wasn't abstract philanthropy anymore. This was a human being, right in front of them, whose extraordinary talent had been hidden in plain sight, while they debated how best to help disadvantaged youth. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Here they were, gathered to support music education for underprivileged children, while one of the most gifted musicians any of them had ever heard was refilling their champagne glasses, her talent invisible to them until this moment. Elena's original composition spoke of redemption, of the beauty that can emerge from brokenness, of the way music can sustain the human spirit through the darkest times. Each phrase was a testament to resilience, each harmony a declaration that dreams deferred are not necessarily dreams destroyed. When the final note faded into silence, the ballroom erupted once again, but this time the applause carried a different quality, not just appreciation for a beautiful performance, but recognition of a profound truth about the value and dignity of every human being, justice and new beginnings. Margaret Sinclair stepped forward once more, her voice filled with emotion. "Elena, I served on the board of the Seattle Symphony when you were with the orchestra. We never forgot your talent, and we never stopped hoping you might return to music." Elena's voice broke as she replied, "Mrs. Sinclair, I didn't think anyone would remember. Talent like yours isn't forgotten," Margaret said firmly. "It just waits for the right moment to re-emerge." Marcus finally stood, his face flushed with embarrassment and rage. He moved toward the microphone, perhaps hoping to regain control of the evening he had orchestrated, but Margaret didn't yield her position. "Well, that was unexpected," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Elena, you can return to your duties now." Margaret turned to face him, her eyes blazing with righteous indignation. "Actually, Marcus, I don't think that will be necessary." She addressed the crowd once more, her voice carrying the passion of someone who had spent a lifetime championing the arts. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're here tonight to support music education for children. What if I told you we could do something even more immediate? What if we could support music right here, right now?" She looked directly at Elena, her smile warm and genuine. "Elena, the symphony has an opening for a woodwind instructor, and we've been searching for someone to lead our community outreach program. The position involves working with underprivileged children, bringing music education directly to communities that might not otherwise have access. Would you be interested in returning to music professionally?" Elena's knees nearly buckled under the weight of this unexpected offer. After 8 years of believing her musical career was over, After countless nights wondering if she'd made a mistake trying to hold on to her dreams, here was Margaret Sinclair offering her not just a return to music, but a chance to make a meaningful difference in young lives. Elena struggled to find words adequate to express the emotions flooding through her. Yes, Mrs. Sinclair. More than interested. More than I ever dreamed possible. The ballroom erupted in applause once more, but now other patrons began approaching the stage. A prominent businessman stepped forward, extending his hand. Elena, I run the Morrison Foundation. We fund arts education programs throughout the Pacific Northwest. I'd like to discuss sponsoring your work with the symphony, particularly your outreach efforts. Another donor called out from her table. Elena, my daughter is studying music at the University of Washington. Would you consider private students? The offers came quickly. Recording opportunities, teaching positions, performance requests. Elena stood overwhelmed by this sudden reversal of fortune, hardly able to process how dramatically her life had changed in the space of a single evening. The true nature revealed, Marcus watched this transformation with growing desperation. His carefully planned humiliation had not only failed but had elevated Elena to a status far beyond what he had intended to destroy. Worse, his cruelty was now visible to everyone in the room, his true nature exposed for all to see. This has been wonderful, he said, stepping closer to the microphone and raising his voice. But let's not forget why we're all here tonight. The Children's Music Education Foundation. Margaret cut him off smoothly, her voice carrying an edge of steel beneath its cultured tones. Yes, Marcus. And what better example of the importance of music education than what we've just witnessed? Elena's story proves that talent exists everywhere, often in places we don't think to look. She paused, letting her words sink in before delivering her final point. It also reminds us that how we treat people, all people, matters. Music has a way of revealing truth, doesn't it? The implicit criticism of Marcus's behavior hung heavy in the air. Several foundation board members exchanged meaningful glances, and Marcus felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. These were people who valued reputation above all else, and his actions tonight had revealed something deeply unflattering about his character. Elena took the microphone one final time, her voice now steady and strong. Thank you all for this incredible evening. 8 years ago I thought my music career was over. Tonight you've shown me that sometimes endings are just new beginnings in disguise. She looked directly at Marcus, her gaze holding no anger, no bitterness, only a dignity that his cruelty could not diminish. And sometimes what someone intends as humiliation becomes an opportunity for grace. The crowd gave her another standing ovation, longer and more heartfelt than before. They were applauding not just her musical talent but her character, her resilience, her ability to transform a moment of intended cruelty into something beautiful and redemptive. The aftermath. As the evening wound down, Elena found herself surrounded by well-wishers, business cards, and opportunities she had never dared to imagine. Margaret Sinclair had already scheduled a lunch meeting for the following week to discuss her return to the symphony, and 3 different foundations had expressed interest in funding her community outreach work. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came when James Robinson approached her as she was finally packing away the saxophone. Ms. Martinez, he said quietly, I've been playing music for 30 years, and what you did tonight, that was something special. You didn't just play those songs, you told your story through them. That's what real music is about. Elena smiled, her eyes still bright with unshed tears. Thank you, James. It felt good to remember who I used to be. No, he said, shaking his head gently. Tonight you didn't remember who you used to be. Tonight you discovered who you've always been, underneath everything else. The music never left you, Elena. It was just waiting for the right moment to come home. Across the ballroom, Marcus stood alone at his table, watching as his elaborate charity gala became a celebration of everything he had tried to destroy. Board members avoided his gaze, donors made their excuses, and the foundation's reputation, which had taken years to build, lay in ruins around his feet. Maria Santos appeared at Elena's side, still wearing her housekeeping uniform but glowing with pride for her friend's triumph. Mija, she said, tears of joy streaming down her cheeks. You did it. You showed them all who you really are. Elena hugged her friend tightly. I couldn't have done it without you reminding me that the music never really left. So what happens now? Maria asked. Elena looked around the ballroom one last time, at the crystal chandeliers that had witnessed her humiliation transform into triumph, at the wealthy patrons who now saw her as an artist rather than invisible help, at Marcus who sat deflated and alone. the architect of his own downfall. Now, she said, her voice filled with wonder and possibility, I get to teach children that their dreams matter, that music can transform lives, that talent can be found anywhere, and everyone deserves to have their gifts recognized and nurtured. She paused, thinking of all the young musicians she would soon work with, all the children who might be facing their own struggles and setbacks. Maria, I spent 8 years believing that accident took away my purpose. Tonight I realized it just led me to a different purpose. All those children I'll get to teach. Maybe they needed to meet someone who understands that talent alone isn't enough. You need resilience too. You need the courage to keep playing even when no one is listening. 6 months later, 6 months after that transformative evening at the Four Seasons Hotel, Elena Martinez stood on the stage of Benaroya Hall, home of the Seattle Symphony, leading a youth orchestra comprised of students from the city's most underserved communities. The program she had developed with Margaret Sinclair's support had become one of the most successful arts education initiatives in the Pacific Northwest. In the audience sat families who had never before set foot in a concert hall, parents who worked multiple jobs to make ends meet but had found time to watch their children discover the transformative power of music. These were Elena's people now, not the wealthy patrons who had witnessed her unexpected triumph, but the working families who understood the value of dreams deferred but not abandoned. Margaret Sinclair watched from the VIP section, her eyes bright with satisfaction. The foundation board had voted unanimously to expand Elena's program to 5 additional cities, and applications were pouring in from young musicians eager to work with the woman who had become something of a legend in music education circles. Marcus Whitfield was notably absent. The scandal from the charity gala had cost him his position as CEO of his tech company and his seat on multiple nonprofit boards. The story of his attempt to humiliate Elena had spread through Seattle's tight-knit philanthropic community, serving as a cautionary tale about the importance of treating all people with dignity and respect. As Elena raised her baton to begin the evening's concert, she caught sight of Maria Santos in the audience, wearing her finest dress and beaming with pride. The two women exchanged a smile that spoke of friendship, resilience, and the beautiful unpredictability of life. The first piece on the program was Summertime, the same Gershwin classic Elena had performed that fateful evening 6 months earlier. But this time, she wasn't playing alone. This time, she was surrounded by 50 young musicians who had learned that their dreams mattered, that their talents deserved to be nurtured, and that sometimes the most beautiful music comes not from perfect technique, but from the courage to keep playing, even when the world doesn't seem to be listening. As the opening notes filled the concert hall, Elena reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had lost her original musical career to an accident beyond her control, had spent years believing her story was over. But life, like music, has a way of finding unexpected harmonies, of transforming discord into something beautiful. The tech CEO who had tried to break her spirit had unknowingly given her the greatest gift of all, the opportunity to discover that her true calling wasn't performing for Seattle's elite, but inspiring the next generation of musicians to believe in themselves. And as the youth orchestra filled Benaroya Hall with the sound of dreams given voice, Elena knew that sometimes the most profound victories come not from avoiding humiliation, but from transforming it into grace. The music swelled, young voices joined in harmony, and Elena Martinez, former principal woodwind of the Seattle Symphony, former hotel worker, and current beacon of hope for aspiring musicians everywhere, smiled as she conducted not just an orchestra, but a testament to the indomitable power of the human spirit. In the end, Marcus Whitfield had been right about one thing. Music does have the power to transform lives. He had simply underestimated whose life would be transformed, and how a moment of intended cruelty could become a symphony of redemption that would echo through the lives of countless children for years to come. The evening's performance concluded to thunderous applause, but the real music, the kind that changes hearts and opens minds and reminds us all of our shared humanity, would continue long after the last note had faded into silence.